Officer Cade Renner never imagined a routine patrol would shatter the frozen silence of his own heart. The blizzard had descended upon the city like a judgment, a churning vortex of white that erased streets, buried cars, and drove every living soul indoors. Every soul but him and his partner. The city had surrendered, but duty had not. The rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers was a lonely metronome counting out the endless hours of their shift. Beside him in the passenger seat, Cade's K9, Odin, was a statue of disciplined readiness, a sleek shadow of black and tan fur against the swirling snow outside. Odin was more than a dog. He was a four-legged extension of the law, trained to a razor's edge of obedience. He was silence, focus, and lethal precision. He never broke protocol. Until tonight. It started with a low whine, a sound so out of character it sliced through the monotonous hum of the cruiser's engine. Cade glanced over. Odin's ears were pricked, his head cocked, his entire body thrumming with an energy that was utterly alien to his usual stoic calm. His gaze was fixed on a darkened, snow-choked alleyway they were passing. "Easy, boy," Cade murmured, his hand instinctively going to the dog's powerful neck. "Nothing out there but ghosts tonight." But Odin wasn't listening. The whine escalated into a series of insistent, guttural barks. He shifted his weight, his claws ticking anxiously on the floor mat. He was pulling, not physically, but with the sheer force of his will, urging Cade toward that black maw between two brick buildings. Cade had been partnered with Odin for 5 years. He'd seen him face down armed suspects, sniff out contraband hidden in steel walls, and remain perfectly still during a full-blown riot. He had never seen him like this. This wasn't training. This was instinct, raw and untamed. Sighing, Cade slowed the cruiser, the tires crunching on the impacted snow. All right, I hear you." He trusted the dog more than he trusted most people. If Odin sensed something in that abyss of wind and white, it was something Cade needed to see. He parked the cruiser, its headlights cutting 2 lonely paths into the storm. The moment he opened his door, the wind ripped at him, a physical blow of ice and fury. He pulled his collar tighter, the cold already seeping into his bones. Odin was out in a flash, a blur of motion disappearing into the alley without a command. "Odin, heel!" Cade shouted, his voice swallowed by the gale. But the dog was gone. A knot of unease tightened in Cade's gut. This was wrong. Terribly wrong. He followed, his heavy boots sinking deep into the fresh powder. The alley was a wind tunnel, channeling the blizzard's rage. Snow swirled in disorienting patterns, and the only sound was the keening shriek of the storm. He found Odin near a dented dumpster, pawing frantically at a small mound in a snowdrift. The dog was whimpering now, a heartbreaking sound of desperate urgency. Cade's first thought was a discarded package, maybe something Odin's training had picked up on. But as he drew closer, his flashlight beam cut through the swirling flakes and landed on the object of Odin's distress. It was small, dark, covered in a crystalline shell of ice. It had the unmistakable shape of a puppy. A tiny, curled-up form, seemingly frozen solid. Cade's heart sank. Just another casualty of the storm's brutal indifference. He'd seen too much of it in his career, the sad, forgotten things left behind in the city's dark corners. "Okay, boy. It's okay," Cade said softly, placing a hand on Odin's back to calm him. The dog, however, refused to be soothed. He nudged the frozen shape with his nose, then looked up at Cade, his intelligent brown eyes filled with a desperate plea that felt profoundly human. Cade knelt, the icy snow soaking through the knee of his tactical pants. He reached out to move the small body, to give it a more dignified rest than being half buried next to a dumpster. But the moment his gloved fingers made contact, a jolt of confusion went through him. It was heavy. Far heavier than a puppy of that size should be. And the texture beneath the ice, it wasn't the soft down of puppy fur. It felt coarse, dense, and unnaturally matted. He brushed away a layer of snow and ice, his flashlight beam focused intently. The shape was canine, yes, but the proportions were all wrong. The snout seemed too long, the paws disproportionately large for such a small frame. It wasn't a domestic dog. A fox kit, maybe? Or a coyote pup that had wandered in from the city's greenbelt? Whatever it was perfectly still, a tiny statue entombed in ice. He assumed the worst. He had to. It was the only way to shield himself from the quiet tragedy of the discovery. But as he prepared to lift the small, rigid form, he saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible plume of vapor that escaped its nostrils and vanished instantly in the frigid air. A breath. Everything stopped. The howling wind, the swirling snow, the cold chewing at his exposed skin, it all faded into the background. There was only that one impossible sign of life. His training kicked in, overriding the shock. He tore off his gloves, his bare fingers instantly stinging from the cold, and pressed them against the creature's neck, searching for a pulse. The skin was like stone, so cold it felt lifeless. He waited. 1 second. 2. Nothing. He was about to pull away, to accept he'd imagined it, when he felt it. A slow, faint, impossibly deep thump. Then a long pause. And another. Thump. It was alive. The realization hit him not as a thought, but as a surge of adrenaline, a primal command that screamed through his entire being. Act. Now. This was no longer a sad discovery. It was a rescue. He didn't hesitate. He unzipped his thick, department issue jacket, exposing his own body to the storm's full, merciless assault. The cold was a physical shock, stealing his breath, but he ignored it. With a tenderness he didn't know he possessed, he carefully scooped the frozen creature from its snowy grave. It was a solid, unyielding block of ice and fur, weighing more than he could have imagined. He wrapped it in his jacket, pulling the fabric tight, trying to shield it with the last remnants of his own body heat. He held it close to his chest, a fragile weight against his thudding heart. "Hold on," he whispered, his own breath pluming in the frigid air. "I've got you. Just hold on." Odin stood beside him, silent now, watching with an unnerving intensity, as if he understood that the battle had just begun. The journey back to the cruiser was a desperate scramble against the elements. The creature in his arms was a dead weight, and Cade's own body was already beginning to protest the vicious cold. Shivering violently, he fumbled with the car door, slid into the driver's seat, and cranked the heat to its absolute maximum. He placed the jacket-wrapped bundle on the passenger seat, where Odin had been. The dog, without being told, had already moved to the back, where he sat like a sentinel, his low, anxious whine starting up again. It was a constant, mournful hum, the soundtrack to Cade's rising panic. He looked at the bundle. No movement. No sound. Was he too late? Was that faint heartbeat just the last dying ember of a fire already extinguished? Doubt gnawed at him, cold and sharp as the wind outside. He pushed it away. He had to. "We're going to get you help," he said to the motionless form, his voice raspy. "You just have to keep fighting. You hear me? Don't you give up." He was talking to an animal he couldn't identify, one that was likely unconscious, but the words were as much for himself as they were for the creature. They were a prayer whispered into the heart of a storm. He drove with a controlled urgency, his hands, numb with cold, gripping the steering wheel. The blizzard fought him every inch of the way, the wipers struggling to clear the relentless onslaught of snow. The city was a ghost town, a landscape of white and gray. He was alone in this fight. He risked a glance at the passenger seat. The creature was so small inside the bulk of his jacket. A fragile life held hostage by the ice. He reached over, his fingers trembling, and rested his hand on the bundle. He could feel the profound, penetrating cold even through the thick layers of fabric. It felt like holding a piece of the storm itself. He thought of Odin, of the dog's inexplicable certainty. How did he know? How did he sense that one tiny spark of life buried under all that snow and ice? It was a mystery that transcended training and logic, a testament to an instinct Cade could only marvel at. His own instincts were now screaming at him, a chorus of primal urgency. Faster. Go faster. He pressed the accelerator, the cruiser fishtailing slightly on the slick road. He corrected, his focus narrowing to a single point, the 24-hour emergency vet clinic on the other side of town. It was a beacon of hope in a world that had gone completely white. As he drove, he kept talking, his voice a low, steady murmur against the howl of the wind. He told the creature about Odin, about their years together. He told it about the summer, about how the sun would feel on its fur. He made promises he had no right to make, weaving a fantasy of warmth and safety. "We're almost there," he repeated, the phrase becoming a mantra. "Just a little longer. You're a fighter. I can feel it." He wasn't sure if he was lying, but he needed to believe it. He needed this small, frozen being to be a fighter, because he was pouring every ounce of his own fight into this one impossible rescue. Odin's whining from the back seat was a constant reminder of the stakes. The dog knew. He had known from the very beginning. Now Cade knew too. This wasn't just about saving an animal. It was about defying the cold, indifferent cruelty of the world, if only for one night. It was about proving that even in the heart of a blizzard, a single heartbeat mattered. When the glowing sign of the veterinary clinic finally appeared through the curtain of snow, a wave of relief so powerful it almost made him dizzy washed over him. He pulled into the empty parking lot, skidding to a halt. He didn't even bother to turn off the engine. He just grabbed the precious bundle and ran. The glass doors of the clinic slid open, and Cade stumbled into a world of sterile brightness and blessed warmth. A young woman at the reception desk looked up, her eyes widening at the sight of the hulking police officer, shivering and without a jacket, clutching a lumpy bundle to his chest. "I need help," Cade said, his voice cracking. "He's frozen. I think he's still alive." The words tumbled out in a rush. A man in green scrubs emerged from a back room, his expression calm and serious. He had tired eyes but a focused energy. "I'm Dr. Eris," he said, already reaching for the bundle. "Bring him back here." Now, Cade followed him into an examination room, the sudden heat of the building making him feel lightheaded. He gently placed the creature, still wrapped in his jacket, on the cold steel of the examination table. Dr. Eris worked with practiced efficiency, unfurling the jacket. The small, ice-encrusted form was revealed under the harsh fluorescent lights. It looked even more pathetic and lifeless here than it had in the alley. Dr. Eris didn't flinch. His fingers, deft and gentle, went straight to the creature's neck, then to its chest, pressing a stethoscope against the icy fur. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Cade's ragged breathing. He watched the doctor's face, searching for any sign, any flicker of hope or despair. Dr. Eris was unreadable, his concentration total. After what felt like an eternity, he lifted his head. "I have a heartbeat," he said, his voice low and even. "It's dangerously slow and thready, but it's there. Core temperature is critical. We have to warm him, but we have to do it slowly. Too fast and the shock could kill him." He was already barking orders at the technician, who had appeared with a stack of heated blankets and 4 supplies. "Get me warm fluids." And the bear hugger. "Let's start with forced warm air." As they worked, a blur of coordinated motion, Cade could only stand back, feeling useless. He watched them shave a small patch on the creature's leg to insert and foreline. He saw the shiver that racked the small body as the first wave of heated air from the warming blanket washed over it. It was the first real sign of life he'd seen, a violent, involuntary spasm that was both terrifying and beautiful. "What is he?" Cade asked, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Eris paused his work for a fraction of a second, glancing at the creature's face, now partially free of ice. "I don't know," he admitted, a frown creasing his brow. "The morphology is unusual. It's not a domestic dog. The snout is too long, the paws too developed. Maybe some kind of coyote hybrid? Or a fox with a genetic anomaly? Right now, it doesn't matter. All that matters is getting his temperature above 94 degrees. For the next hour, Cade stood vigil as the doctor and his team fought to coax life back into the frozen body. They moved with a quiet, focused intensity, a small army waging war against the cold. Cade watched as the ice slowly melted from the creature's fur, revealing its true color. It wasn't brown or gray, but a deep, dark black, almost sable. The fur was thick and shaggy, a wild coat designed for a life far from city streets. As the creature warmed, more details emerged, each one adding to the mystery. The paws were immense, armed with thick, non-retractable claws that were more like talons. The ears were rounded, not pointed like a German shepherd's or a coyote's. Dr. Eris kept murmuring his observations, more to himself than to Cade. Incredible bone density. Look at the sagittal crest on the skull. This is a predator. The vet's initial clinical curiosity was slowly morphing into something else, a dawning sense of awe and confusion. He took a dental tool and gently pried open the creature's mouth, examining the teeth. He shone a penlight into its eyes, which were still closed. He spent a long time looking at the paws, turning them over in his hands. Cade felt a new kind of tension building in the room. It wasn't just the tension of a life hanging in the balance. It was the tension of a revelation waiting to be born. The creature's breathing was becoming stronger, deeper. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was growing steadier, a reassuring pulse in the quiet room. It was working. They were winning. Then, Dr. Eris straightened up. He put down his tools and turned to face Cade, his expression one of profound gravity. He wiped his hands on his scrubs, a gesture that seemed to take a great deal of effort. "Officer," he began, his voice hushed, as if he were afraid of his own words. "I've been a vet for 20 years. I've worked with wildlife rescue, with exotics, with everything you can imagine." He paused, taking a deep breath. He looked from Cade to the small, dark creature on the table, whose chest was now rising and falling in a steady, life-affirming rhythm. "This is not a puppy. It's not a fox. It's not a coyote." He met Cade's gaze, and in his eyes, Cade saw a mixture of scientific wonder and pure, unadulterated shock. Based on the dentition, the cranial structure, the paws. "Officer Renner, I am almost certain that what you have here is a wolf cub." The words hung in the sterile air of the exam room, heavier than any physical weight. A wolf. A wolf cub. In the heart of the city, frozen in an alley. The concept was so preposterous, so outside the realm of possibility, that Cade's mind struggled to grasp it. Wolves were creatures of myth and wilderness, of sprawling forests and snow-capped mountains hundreds of miles away. They didn't belong here, in a world of concrete and steel. The implications crashed down on him all at once. His duty as a police officer was clear. A wolf, even a cub, was a Class A mammal. He was legally obligated to report it to the state's Department of Fish and Wildlife. They would come, they would take it, and its fate would be decided by protocols and bureaucracy. It would become a case number, a specimen, its future uncertain. It might be euthanized. It might end up in a zoo. It would not be free. Cade looked at the cub. Its ordeal was etched into its tiny frame, but life was stubbornly, miraculously returning. He saw the slight twitch of its ear, the flutter of its eyelids. He thought of Odin's frantic desperation, the instinct that had led them to this moment. He thought of his own whispered promises in the car, the desperate one-sided conversation about warmth and sun and safety. All of it would be for nothing. He would be handing this creature over from one cold, indifferent fate to another. "No," Cade said, the word escaping him before he even realized he'd thought it. Dr. Eris looked at him, his expression softening with understanding. "Officer, my hands are tied. The law is the law, just give me a few hours," Cade pleaded, his voice low and urgent. "Let's just get him completely stable. Let's make sure he's going to make it through the night. Then we can make the call." What's a few more hours? He was asking the vet to risk his license, to become complicit in a lie of omission. He was asking for a leap of faith. Dr. Eris studied Cade's face for a long moment. He saw the exhaustion, the desperation, and the fierce, irrational protectiveness in the officer's eyes. He glanced back at the cub, a tiny miracle of survival on his steel table. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "He's my patient," the vet said quietly. "And my first duty is to him. He's not stable yet. Not by a long shot. It was a gift. A temporary reprieve. Gratitude washed over Cade, so potent it almost brought him to his knees. But their tentative victory was short-lived. Just as a fragile sense of hope began to settle in the room, the cub's body went rigid. The heart monitor, which had been beeping a steady rhythm, erupted into a frantic, high-pitched alarm. The cub was seizing. Its small body convulsed violently, a horrifying dance of misfiring nerves. "He's crashing!" Eris yelled, all calm professionalism vaporizing into raw urgency. "The rewarming, it might have caused a metabolic cascade. His electrolytes are all over the place." He began administering injections, calling out drug names to the technician who scrambled to assist. Cade stood frozen in horror, watching the life they had fought so hard to save being ripped away before his eyes. The cub's tiny limbs thrashed, its back arched, and a choked, gurgling sound came from its throat. It was a sight of pure, untempered suffering. Helplessness was a physical poison in Cade's veins. He couldn't do anything. He couldn't fix this. He could only watch. Acting on an impulse he didn't understand, he reached out and placed his hand on the cub's convulsing flank. The fur was warm now, alive. "Don't you dare," Cade whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't you dare give up. You fought the storm. You fought the ice. Fight this. Please. Fight." He didn't know if the cub could hear him, if his touch meant anything at all, but he couldn't just stand by. He had to be a part of this fight, even if it was just as an anchor in the storm. The seizing continued, an agonizing eternity packed into seconds. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The small body went limp. The alarm on the monitor fell silent, replaced by the steady, miraculous beep, beep, beep of a stable heart. The cub let out a tiny, weak whimper, the first sound it had made since its rescue. It was the most beautiful sound Cade had ever heard. Dr. Eris leaned against the counter, his chest heaving, sweat beading on his forehead. "He's back," he breathed. "The little devil is back." And in that moment Cade knew. There was no going back. This was his fight now. This was his responsibility. This tiny, tenacious wolf cub was his. Through the long, dark hours of the night, a silent pact was forged in the quiet hum of the veterinary clinic. Cade never left the cub's side. He sat on a cold stool, his eyes fixed on the steady rise and fall of its chest, a rhythm that mirrored his own breathing. Dr. Eris, true to his word, made no calls. He updated a medical chart with vague notes. Canine, juvenile, unknown breed. He and Cade shared a pot of stale coffee, speaking little, their shared secret a heavy but comforting presence in the room. Cade had left Odin in the cruiser, knowing the dog would wait patiently. He checked on him periodically, the loyal K9 greeting him with a quiet tail wag before resuming his stoic watch. It was as if Odin understood his partner was now standing guard over a new, impossibly fragile member of the pack. Toward dawn, as the first gray light began to filter through the windows, the cub stirred. It wasn't the violent twitching of a seizure, but a slow, deliberate movement. It stretched a paw, its claws extending and retracting. Then, it lifted its head. The movement was weak, shaky, but determined. It opened its eyes. Cade felt his breath catch in his throat. They were a startling, luminous shade of pale yellow, like captured moonlight. They were ancient eyes, full of a wildness that no city could ever tame. The cub looked around the sterile room, its gaze finally landing on Cade. There was no fear in those yellow eyes. There was only a calm, quiet curiosity, a flicker of what looked like recognition. Slowly, Cade extended his hand, palm up. The cub watched the movement, its head tilted. After a moment's hesitation, it leaned forward and nudged his fingers with its wet nose. The touch was feather-light, a tentative bridge between two worlds. At that moment, Cade's cruiser radio, which he'd brought inside, crackled to life with the morning check-in. The sound of official business, of rules and protocols, felt like an intrusion from another lifetime. He knew what he had to do. He spent the next 2 hours on the phone, working in a low, urgent voice from the clinic's small office. He wasn't calling fish and wildlife. He was calling in favors, pulling on threads of connection he had accumulated over a decade on the force. He called a retired colleague who now volunteered for a backcountry rescue group. He called a conservation officer he'd once helped on a case, a woman known for bending the rules for the right reasons. He was looking for something that officially didn't exist, a ghost network of wildlife rehabilitators who operated outside the bureaucracy, people who cared more about the animal than the statute. Finally, he found it. A name. A number. A man named Silas who ran a private wolf sanctuary deep in the northern mountains, a place so remote it was off most maps. Cade explained the situation in clipped, concise terms. Silas listened without interruption. When Cade was finished, there was a long pause. "You know the risk you're taking, officer?" Silas's voice was gravelly, weathered. "Yes," Cade said simply. "Bring him," Silas said. "I'll be waiting." Dr. Aris helped Cade prepare the cub for the journey. He provided a heated carrier, a supply of high-calorie formula, and a list of instructions. "He's a fighter," the vet said, clapping Cade on the shoulder. "You gave him a chance. That's more than most would have done." As Cade was about to leave, he brought Odin inside. The big German shepherd walked cautiously into the exam room, his senses on high alert. He approached the carrier where the cub now lay, alert and watching. Odin sniffed at the mesh door, his tail giving a slow, tentative wag. The cub, far from being afraid, pressed its nose against the mesh, whining softly. Odin responded with a low, gentle huff and then, incredibly, he licked the carrier door. An acceptance. A blessing from the Pax Alpha. The drive north was a quiet, surreal journey. The blizzard had broken, and the world was a pristine, blinding expanse of white under a brilliant blue sky. The cub slept most of the way, a peaceful, trusting weight in the carrier beside him. Cade drove for hours, leaving the city and its rigid grid of streets far behind. He drove toward mountains and forests, toward the world where this small creature belonged. Finding the sanctuary was an odyssey in itself, a series of unmarked dirt roads that climbed deeper and deeper into the wilderness. Finally, he saw it, a simple log cabin with a plume of smoke rising from its chimney, surrounded by vast, fenced enclosures that disappeared into the trees. Silas was waiting on the porch, a tall, weathered man with eyes as clear and pale as the winter sky. He took the carrier from Cade with a gentle reverence. "You did a good thing," he said, his gaze fixed on the yellow eyes staring out from within. Handing over the carrier was one of the hardest things Cade had ever done. It felt like giving away a part of himself. He watched as Silas took the cub inside, to a new life, a new future. Months passed. The snow melted. The city thawed. Life for Cade and Odin returned to its familiar rhythm of patrols and calls. But something inside Cade had shifted. The frozen silence in his own heart had cracked. The world seemed more vibrant, more fragile, more precious. He found himself looking at the world through different eyes, seeing the silent, hidden struggles in the city's shadows. One crisp autumn afternoon, an email arrived. It was from Silas. There was no text, only a video file attached. Cade opened it, his heart pounding. The video showed a vast, snowy enclosure, dotted with pine trees. A group of young wolves were playing, chasing each other through the deep powder. One of them, a magnificent creature with fur as dark as a moonless night and startling yellow eyes, stopped and looked directly at the camera. It was strong. It was healthy. It was wild. And it was free. Cade watched the video over and over, with Odin resting his heavy head on his knee. What had begun as a routine patrol in a blizzard had become a profound journey of the soul. The police dog who found a frozen puppy had, in reality, uncovered a hidden well of compassion in his partner, reminding him that true strength isn't about enforcing rules, but about protecting the vulnerable, no matter what form they take. In the quiet loyalty of his dog and the wild spirit of a wolf, Cade had found a missing piece of his own humanity. He realized that some instincts are truer than any law, and that sometimes, the most important duty is the one you swear not to a badge, but to a single, fragile heartbeat fighting to survive in the cold.